Okay, we're back up.
Thank you. We'll call this meeting to order at, anybody have the time?
5:37.
Thank you. We'll just take a roll call real quick. In the meeting, we have Sarah Ethier, Matthew Van Ormer, Frank Treglia, Jennifer Nolan, Roxy Feiner, Francine Koss, Beth Campbell, Heather Patchell. Do we have Sal Santa Maria on the line?
Yes, I just joined.
Thanks, Sal. Dave Calvecchio.
I'm here.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The purpose of this special meeting tonight of the Board of Education is to reevaluate the instructional model related to COVID. And you all had received the presentation from Francine, and I will turn that over to you or the admins, Francine.
Turn it over to me, and then the admin and I will share the response.
Okay.
Sorry, but now I'm just.
If Francine's speaking, we can't hear her.
She's reconnecting.
Okay.
We're just having some audio difficulties, so please bear with us. Thank you. Stacy, can you please let Francine back into the meeting on Zoom?
Yep.
Thank you.
Stacy, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank God. All right. So sorry about that delay. You can move to the next slide if you'd like. Thank you. I'm going to introduce John Perucci. He is going to give the introduction to this presentation, and then you will hear from each of the administrators throughout this presentation. Stacy, we'll let you know if we need to do any forwarding of slides. So John, I turn it over to you.
Stacy, can you let Mr. Perucci in? He's going to log in on a different device. It'll be
Sure.
John 1. Thank you.
How about now?
We can hear you.
Okay, I had planned on just reviewing what the proposal would look like, but I've decided that I would just read a statement that I prepared. The decision that you are burdened with making tonight will have a significant impact on how the district functions and the quality of education that we are able to provide our students. The administrative team is keenly aware of the gravity of this decision. Our presentation provides considerable information, all with the purpose of providing the board with a foundation necessary to make a good decision with regard to the next steps in our reopening plan. The admin team met on September 18th, 2020, consider the needs of our educational community, the effectiveness of the current instructional model, and the risks associated with taking the next step towards full in-person instruction. Our goal was to weigh the risks and offer a plan to expand in-person instruction safely and effectively. Please consider the following points. COVID-19 positivity rates remain low, especially in Thomaston. In-person instruction allows us to better meet special education /504 obligations and state requirements. Furthermore, we have informal evidence that would suggest that general education students would benefit significantly from expanded in-person instruction as well. The new state mandate for recording and reporting attendance is extremely burdensome in a hybrid model. Students and staff have fully complied with safety regulations, wearing masks, social distancing, etc. Therefore, lowering the risk of contamination or transmission. Equity issues. Parents have varying levels of ability to support at-home student learning, leading to disengagement during asynchronous remote learning. Cognitive fatigue and reduced stamina due to students being in and out of school. Teacher fatigue. The time it requires to develop lessons and tasks for two different models is extensive. The current pace cannot be maintained. We believe that ultimately the quality of instruction will be negatively affected, leading to lower standardized test scores. We encourage the board to consider all factors. However, we ask that you base your decision on the following points. The current hybrid plan was appropriate at the time the original reopening plan was developed. There was so much uncertainty regarding the transmission and containment of COVID-19. However, since the commencement of school, we have uncovered flaws in the hybrid model that can only be overcome by expanding in-person instruction and moving to an asynchronous model for remote learning. 2, there are risks associated with expanding in-person instruction. We are all anxious about the very real possibility of someone in our school community contracting the virus. We are also very concerned about the quality of education we are currently providing. We ask that the board weigh those factors and attempt to strike a balance between risk and the educational needs of our learners. And 3, the administrative team is unanimous in our proposal to expand in-person instruction to 4 days a week and move to a synchronous learning model for remote learning days and for our distance learning students. It should be expected that some problems arise associated with the proposed model. However, the team feels strongly that we can overcome those obstacles with the resources currently available. I want to thank the board for considering our proposal.
Thank you, Mr. Perucci. This is John Kozlak, principal at Black Rock School. Stacy, could I have the next slide, please?
Sure.
Thank you. So as Mr. Perucci said, we feel very strongly that we have an acute need to expand the in-person learning for all the reasons that he stated. There are two factors that drive this model choice that we feel need to be in place properly. One is that the indicators of spread and prevalence of COVID-19 are minimal in a way that we can safely move forward. Also, we need to have the operational ability to implement critical mitigation strategies. By that, we mean the ability to clean, to maintain our schools, and so forth. I'm going to illuminate both of those factors in the following slide. Stacy, could I have the next slide, please? So the next slide here talks about the spread and prevalence of COVID-19 in Thomaston. So as you look at this graph, it does look like it swings sort of wildly. The scale is very small on the left side, so I think that contributes to that.
There's 90 people.
As you can see in small lettering underneath the graph, this is indicative of the cases of COVID-19 in the town of Thomaston, not in our school district. So to date, since we've started school, none of the new cases of COVID in Thomaston have been within our schools or someone who either goes to or works in our schools. As you can see, there's two sort of checkpoints. Our first day of school, and for the first 2 weeks, we had early dismissals or half days. Starting on September 14th, we returned to full day instruction with in-person students coming 2 days a week. As you can see, there's been some variability. It does not seem to have a direct correlation to coming back to school, as it's gone up and then down and a little bit up again. And I want to just illuminate the most recent indicator on September 22nd being 13.2. Please know, as it says on top, that that's a 7-day average per 100,000 population. Thomaston obviously is well below 100,000 in population. So again, just to highlight what that means for Thomaston, 13.2 is equivalent to 1 case per day over the week preceding that indicator being drawn, okay? So that would be 7 cases in the week leading up, in the 7 days leading up to that indicator on the graph. Next slide, please, Stacy. So this slide talks about our ability to maintain a safe and clean school environment. So since we started school in person, our custodians have been disinfecting and sanitizing student workspaces, teacher and staff workspaces, highly used areas, touch points, and so on, every day that students have been in school. As a result of that, they're finding it more difficult than usual to maintain the other custodial operations in the building, sweeping, vacuuming, etc. Our proposal will have Wednesday still as a remote learning day for all students, which will give our custodial staff an opportunity to sort of catch up on all of those duties that they haven't been able to do with as much fidelity as in the past because of the daily disinfecting that they've been doing. We have already brought on 2 additional custodians in the district, and we are in the process of bringing on and onboarding 2 more to provide our custodial staff with more human resources to accomplish this task. And we think, and based on the feedback from our custodians, this will be extremely helpful as well. So just to summarize my part here, we do believe that we have the 2 critical factors in place to move forward with more in-person instruction. Number 1 being minimal spread of COVID within the community, and also our ability to keep our learning spaces clean. Thank you.
May I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the admin team, when they came together to discuss what our next course of action should be, or what we would like to recommend, we came up with 2 proposals. One is an expanded hybrid model, and the other one is a restricted full in-person model. While we are recommending for the full in-person restricted model, I wanted to spend a little bit of time discussing the expanded hybrid model, which is also an option. Next slide, please. So the expanded hybrid model is very similar to what we are currently doing, with some additional things in place. One of the things in place that's important to note is synchronous learning. Wednesdays would be a synchronized half day of remote learning for all students. And in addition, we would also fold in some high school club meetings, either virtually or in person, depending upon the particular club and organization that is meeting. And currently, right now, in pre-K through 3 at Black Rock School, related arts, that's the music, that's the library, that's the art classes, are currently going into the classrooms. So students are not going into the actual art classroom. The art teacher is actually going to them. So those are the things that you see in blue that are different and that would expand our current hybrid model. Students in this model would be either going to school Monday and Tuesday and working remotely from home on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or they would be working remotely from home on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and going to school on Thursday and Friday, just as they do currently. Next slide, please.
Good evening, everyone. Gianni Perugini, Assistant Principal at Thomaston High School. In both models presented, we're asking the Board of Ed to consider the approval of synchronous learning. Synchronous learning defined is basically live real-time instruction from teachers. So all remote and distance learners will be required to log into class remotely during regularly scheduled class time. So basically, teachers instruct live, students learn live. Now, please note that this does not mean teachers and students will be required to be live for the entire school day or every minute of that school day. But once synchronous learning is approved, details and flexibilities as appropriate per school will be determined. In the expanded hybrid model, attendance for remote and distance learners will be in compliance with the Connecticut State Department of Education mandate. And the impact to attendance is as follows. In grades 7 to 12, if a student does not log into class virtually during the regularly scheduled time, they will be marked absent for class attendance. If their absence results in the student missing 50% of the school day, they will be marked absent for the day. And in grades pre-K to 6, if a student does not log into class virtually for at least 50% of the school day, they will be marked absent for the day. Again, synchronous learning is in addition to the expanded hybrid model that we ask you to consider for approval. Next slide.
This is Kristen Bernier again, and to elaborate a little bit upon the expanded hybrid model, again, what's in blue would be new. So we would be expanding our cohorts a little bit more. We would be mixing up the students slightly, and the students would also be able to share materials such as an art class or in PE class or where it's appropriate. But again, we would continue to wear the cloth face coverings indoors, except when we are eating. And if students cannot socially maintain distance outdoors, they would be expected to wear a mask. We would continue the cohorting as feasible with the same teacher when it's appropriate and when feasible. Next slide, please. And again, we would continue with what we are currently doing. If you chose the expanded hybrid model, it would be continuing to do the 3 to 6 feet apart when feasible and facing the same direction and using both virtual and in-person student, staff, and board events. Next slide, please.
So meals, snacks, and drinks would proceed as they have been for the last several weeks. You see, again, blue is new. However, in this particular case, we started some of these new actions in the middle of our duration that we're in now. So we are going to continue with the Wednesday meal distribution for students. We have started and will continue to permit drinking water in classrooms as the students were trained to do so safely by the nurses. And we will allow snacking during mask breaks outdoors because there is still no eating in the classrooms. Next slide, Stacy, please. Busing would remain the same with the one exception of being no loading and unloading restrictions. And I need to bring to the attention of the board that right now we have very low ridership on our buses. So even bringing a full group back, although this is the expanded hybrid model, even if we were to bring all of the in-person students back, our buses would not be crowded. They would still be able to sit, the students would still be able to sit on their own unique seats at this point in time. As the in-person numbers grow, of course, that would change. But at this point in time, we no longer need the restriction of loading and unloading of the buses because there are so few children. Next slide, please, Stacy. The next 3 slides are going to give you some information that we felt would be fair for you to have and necessary. In some cases like this slide, it's showing the pros for this plan. And in the next slide, it's going to show the cons. And then ultimately there's a slide at the end that points to some of the requests from our teachers that you may find we've already relayed as being solved by the plan that we're talking about. So first here are pros. The teachers union put out a survey to their staff, and these are the first 4 bullets are a result of that. So 80% of the teachers feel that their classroom space is adequate for social distancing under the current hybrid model, and using the expanded hybrid model, that would be the same population. So there would be no change, and that's why this bullet is a pro. 56% of our center school teachers feel successful using the current hybrid model. That's a pro in this case because it is above 50%, but quite frankly, that means that we've only got about half of the staff that are feeling successful. And what that definition is would have to be further teased out by the staff, but I put it on the pros list just the same. 63% and 69% of our teachers between the high school and center school prefer to teach synchronously. So again, we're looking at a majority of the staff, but that means that there are still a good portion of our staff that may not feel that this is a pro, and I need to assure the Board of Ed that if they do choose to follow either one of these plans, which both contain synchronous learning, that they understand that our professional development day on the 9th of October would concentrate on that, and we would make certain that our teachers would have what they need to begin synchronized instruction. Increased teacher access to remote learners is a pro because the synchronized learning would allow for that. And then of course, from our COVID liaison, she felt very strongly that our hybrid plan limited the health and safety risk, and that's an important pro. Stacy, if you would move on to the cons slide. The cons, 37% and 48% of our high school and elementary school teachers feel that they are successful in the hybrid model. Again, these numbers we would need to tease out a little bit more as to what they don't feel they're successful at, but they're not very positive. So offering an expanded hybrid model could alleviate some of the negative that the teachers are feeling. 35% of the Black Rock School teachers would prefer to teach synchronously. And I'd like to address this a little more because this was information from the teachers survey. And this afternoon, Mr. Kozak and I met with the teachers at Black Rock School because of their concerns about synchronous learning. And I believe that if we were to re-offer the survey, that number might change because we had to explain to them exactly what synchronized learning would look like, because it will look different in grades K through 6 than it will in 7, 12, and even in pre-K and in our related arts. So having a little bit more information for the teachers might have moved that, but I still needed to list it as their feedback at the time. And then decreased flexibility for students who cannot attend school synchronously. This is important for our parents. There are some parents who have expressed a concern that if we were to go to synchronous learning as opposed to asynchronous, which is how we've been doing distance instruction so far, that their children would not be able to either have the tolerance to get through a lengthy day at the computer, or that they would not be home to assist their child with the learning. So I think it was really well said by Mr. Perucci that there are some obstacles with this plan, but he and the team are confident that those obstacles could be overcome with current resources. So I think that's very important that I highlight that. Next slide, please, Stacy. Part of the survey from teachers included a list of what they felt would be improvements to how we do business right now. So the first two bullets have to do with social distancing, spacing out in classes and such. I want to remind the board that whether we're in the expanded hybrid model or in the restricted full in-person model, we would still be abiding by, to the best of our ability, the 3 to 6 foot distancing that we have been abiding by so far in the current hybrid model. So that would mean that our desks would still be positioned the way that they are, with 3 to 6 feet apart. An example of this would be, I'll use the BlackRock example, but maybe more like 4 feet apart to get 20 children in a room, for example. But right now we don't have any classes at BlackRock that are 20 children in person, but they could very well be in a few weeks' time if parents change their minds and send their children back to school. The teachers did ask that we allow for them to create more explicit mask breaks for students and staff. Mask breaks occur. I need to say that one more time. Mask breaks occur. And depending on the grade level, teachers have greater or lesser flexibility with how they are able to allow for mask breaks. But mask breaks do occur now. I watch them every day here at the high school, so I can speak that they're happening at all the buildings, but it was a request of the teachers, and that is something that the administrators are going to follow up on. They did ask in the next two bullets about custodians and cleaning, and I believe that Mr. Kozlak summed that up quite nicely. We're on our way to getting more personnel so that we will eventually be able to give back Wednesdays to instruction in person. And then the last bullet was the request to have the webcams be installed back sometime between June 30th and our board meeting on the 2nd of July. We approved to purchase webcams with microphones that were going to be attached to the BrightLink projectors in every classroom that would allow teachers to record their live instruction because our plan was originally an asynchronous plan, and those webcams were going to allow them to do that. At this time, those webcams and the components that go with that whole project are on back order, as many foreign-made items are right now. Back order seems to be the way of life. So instead of taking an inferior product or choosing to cancel that order, we are working on doing some research now as to how we're going to make sure that we have appropriate webcam or camera availability with our teachers. And rather specifically, I need to say, every teacher has a Chromebook with a camera. It's not the best resolution, but it is a camera. And our teachers also have, for the most part, in every room, if there's a BrightLink or some other projection device in their classroom, some of them have monitors that project, they have a desktop computer as well. So if they're in their classrooms, they would have access to 2 devices, one with a camera, one without, and that would allow them some flexibility. And that's what we will be concentrating on when we do our synchronized learning training, if the board approves synchronized learning this evening. Next slide, please, Stacy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Badowski, the Director of Curriculum. And now we're going on to Proposal 2, which we respectfully ask the board to consider tonight as our recommendation. We are looking at a restricted full in-person model with a 4-day a week for students and staff. Next slide. So our full in-person model would look like this. Students would be coming in Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays for students that still choose in-person learning. And Wednesdays would be a synchronous half-day or early dismissal, remote learning day for students. Teachers would have that extra time that they requested earlier for preparation time for their lessons. So that's really important. We're also looking at athletics according to the CIAC protocols for in-person learners. Our high school club meetings that were talked about earlier will be done either virtual or in person, depending on the number of students. And our pre-K related arts will also be meeting in their classrooms and no longer on a cart. Next slide. That's you, Gianni.
Thank you, Jess. Again, Gianni Perugini, assistant principal of Thomaston High School. In the restricted full in-person model, again, we ask that you consider the approval of synchronous learning. Like I stated in slide 7, synchronous learning is students and teachers participating in live real-time instruction. So the impact on attendance in the restricted full in-person model with regard to synchronous learning comes on Wednesday for all students, because all students are remote learners. Also, distance learners will be expected to log in daily. And again, the impact on attendance in grades 7 to 12, student does not log into class, they'll be considered absent. If they're absent results in the student missing 50% of the day, they'll be marked absent for the day. In grades K to 6, if a student does not log in to class virtually for at least 50% of the school day, it will be marked absent for the day. And again, that's in compliance with the CSDE mandate. So synchronous learning is in addition to the restricted full in-person model that we ask you to consider approving. Next slide.
The students will continue to cohort as much as possible together. There might be some minor mixing and expansion of the cohorts, and students will be able to share materials. The face coverings will continue as in previous slides. We've mentioned that will obviously continue, and outdoors when the social distancing 6 feet cannot be maintained. Next slide. We will have full in-person classes, activities, and events. Right now, approximately 82% of our students are in-person learning. Students will continue to maintain the 3 to 6 feet apart whenever feasible, and face coverings and virtual student, staff, parent, or board meetings will be done either in person or virtual, depending on the number of people in the meeting. Next slide.
For restricted full in-person, the meals, drinks, and snacks hold the same. It's exactly the same situation that we would have under the model that we presented earlier, the expanded hybrid, or under this preferred model, which is the restricted full in-person model. Next slide, please. While the blue shows that no loading and unloading restrictions exist, we know that those also will not exist under the proposed expanded hybrid model. However, the 4th bullet is new under the restricted model. If we were to have clubs and be able to secure after school buses, the late bus, drivers, that is, drivers are in short supply. So if we're able to get afternoon buses, then we will be able to offer those buses. But right now I have no confirmation of that, but it would be added under the restricted full in-person model if available. Getting to the pros, cons, and teacher needs. Some of these you would have seen on a former slide, either as a con or in some other format based on the difference in models. So here you see 55% of the high school teachers prefer to be full in person. 63 and 69%, we remember this, I think you would remember this from our slide up above. It was under a con, under a pro. This is synchronous learning. The high school and center school prefer synchronous learning. The majority of the staff do. And increased teacher access for remote learners, again, is a pro, just like it was up above, because synchronous is really the main difference in both of these plans, is that we would have more access to engage our learners live. Let's look at the con slide, please. 80% of teachers feel that their classroom space is adequate under the current hybrid model. I said earlier that we would maintain the 3 to 6 feet distancing between desks. Desks would still face the same direction as they do now. So while 80% of the teachers feel that it is adequate in their classrooms now with the current hybrid model, please do not infer that that means only 20% would want to expand that to in-person. The question was specifically, do you feel you have adequate space in your hybrid classroom? And I believe that between the administrators and myself tonight, we've explained that we would still be able to accommodate those in-person learners if we were to go full in-person. 44 and 43% respectively of the center school and Black Rock teachers would prefer in-person instruction. It's listed as a con because it's below 50%. But like I said earlier, that just means that we have a number of teachers who feel the opposite. And we need to take a look at what they feel and what these teachers who are in the 43 and 44% feel, and make sure we address those needs, most especially during our professional development in October. 35% of Black Rock teachers would prefer to teach synchronously. Again, that's listed as a con because it's such a low percentage, but I believe I explained that adequately the last time we were on a con slide where our Black Rock teachers received an explanation today. And if I could go into a little bit more detail on this slide, if we were to go into a restricted full in-person model, the main difference for synchronous learning would be that grades K through 6 would have their online teacher if they are an opt-out distance learner. That means that if you are an in-person learner, you have your classroom teacher every day in person, and on Wednesdays you have that same classroom teacher for your distance learning. But if you are a distance learner 5 days a week, you have a designated teacher for your grade level who meets with you online and your classmates in that grade level. That's the difference, the main difference between this model and the model previously, because we don't have as large of a group that would be moving in and out of the synchronous learning, because everyone would be back, 82% would be back in school, and we'd have a small percentage that would be permanently distance learning. There'd be decreased flexibility for students who cannot attend school synchronously. Again, Mr. Perucci pointed that out. We are aware of this. Some parents do have a preference to asynchronous learning, or they may not have a preference, but they have no option because during the day their children are in a circumstance of childcare that will not permit them to log in synchronously. We understand that, and our building principals are going to work toward a solution with those parents that have that dilemma. But I want to point out that the Connecticut State Department of Education says that if you do not log in synchronously, you will be marked absent. That is something we can't control. So we'll do all we can at our end with our resources. Please understand that that attendance policy is what the State Department of Ed is holding us to right now. And then I wanted to point out on this con slide, expanded health and safety risk. I know this is obvious because we'd be bringing more children back and we would be blending those Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday cohorts, but it needs to be said out loud. We had to strike a balance between providing what we felt would be the best educational circumstance and what we could risk. And in this particular case, with the conditions that were brought to your attention by Mr. Koslak, we are not experiencing COVID spread in this area. We can go by county, we can go by Thomaston, we can go by our schools. If we just keep it to our schools, we have great confidence. Even broadening it out to Thomaston, we have great confidence. So taking the risk by expanding this plan to an all in-person is a good and smart risk because of the conditions that we're living under now. Next slide, Stacy. This slide is exactly the same as the slide from before. So I don't want to belabor it by going over it again. I do want to remind you about the custodians. They are coming. Two more are being onboarded, 2 have already started. And I wanted to make sure you understood what I meant by the webcams. There will be camera access, just not through the webcams that we intended to purchase. And when we meet in October at our regular board meeting, we will have a plan of action for the funds that we were going to use for those webcams so that it will allow for the teachers to have expanded resources for synchronized learning and other things that they're doing in the classroom with instruction. Next slide, please, Stacey.
Hi, so this is Andrea Peters, Director of Pupil Services. As stated by Principal Ferrucci at the onset of this meeting and other team members throughout this presentation, our unanimous instructional model recommendation is for restricted full in-person. This is a summary of what that model will look like. So that model will be 4 days a week for in-person learners. This would be Monday, Tuesday with a Wednesday day of cleaning for the buildings, but for students, this would look like a half day of synchronous learning and another half day of teacher preparation time. Full in-person classes, activities, meetings, and events. This is, for example, for those things that do make sense to meet in person. However, such things like PPT meetings, in order to limit exposure, would be maintained virtually. Students would continue to sit 3 to 6 feet apart whenever feasible and continuing to face the same direction. This is not different from what we've already presently been doing. Athletics per the CIAC protocols for in-person learners. So our athletics would be available for those who are presenting themselves for in-person learning. And our pre-kindergarten through 3rd grade related arts would be meeting in their related arts classrooms. There would be a mixing and an expansion of cohorts with students sharing materials. Cloth face coverings would continue to be mandatory, except when eating or outdoors, when 6 feet of distance cannot be maintained. And all school days would be synchronous for opt-out learners as well. Could I have the next slide, please? So just looking at the duration of this model, unless the COVID-19 spread percentages worsen, forcing a change in plan, the recommended duration of the instructional model is Tuesday, October the 13th, which is just after our Columbus Day holiday, through Tuesday, November 24th, which is just before our Thanksgiving holiday. Please note that, of course, if the percentages worsen, the board has an option at any time to close schools, as I imagine, so does the governor, if that were the case. So this is just looking at current statistics moving forward. It is further recommended that the Thomaston Board of Education convene a meeting on or before November 9th in order to decide the instructional model, which will be in place after the above listed duration. So on November 9th to meet to determine what will happen after November 24th. Next slide, please.
So on behalf of the administrative team who worked collaboratively on this plan, on both of these plans, I am asking the board to accept and approve the restricted full in-person model as presented for the duration of October 13, 2020 through November 24, 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, Francine, and all the administrators. Do we have questions from the board for anyone before we?
Actually, Beth, want to make a motion, then we can get the discussion.
This is Roxy Finer. I make a motion for the Thomaston Board of Education to accept, approve the restricted full in-person model as presented for the duration of October 13, 2020 through November 24, 2020.
Dave Calvecchio will second it.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
I do have one question. Just asking about when the classrooms are going to be taped, is there going to be a precaution for the people that are in the class so that if there's behaviors or something going on, that they won't see that at home?
So the classes that would be live would be
sorry.
7 through 12,
Okay.
grades 7 through 12.
Okay. So, okay.
If you're talking about the model that we're recommending,
Yeah. Okay.
grades 7 through 12 would have the live recording,
Okay.
the live synchronized learning.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's Frank Traglia. I like the idea of the 4-day. I mean, can't knock it. The only question I have, if any staff goes from the high school to the Black Rock school, can we just try to keep some sort of record of it? I know it sounds crazy, but at least if one school does get it, maybe we don't have to close the other 2 schools.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We have contact tracing. Yes, I understand what you're saying. So if someone is shared across two buildings, Frank, is that what you mean?
That's what I mean.
So we do have staff that are shared across buildings. We have one staff member who would go outside of the administration. We have one staff member who would go to all three buildings. And then we have other staff like our related arts between Blackrock and Center School.
Right.
We know their schedule and we know when they're arriving. So we would be able to use that for contact tracing. And they typically sign in or provide us with information that they've visited.
So at least if we only have to close one building, that'd be better than closing all three for, you know. All right, that's the only question.
Hi, Sal Sandberg, I have a question.
Jen, I can't hear you.
Jen Sal's talking.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Sal, but Jen wasn't able to hear you. So hang on just one second for Jen. Okay, go ahead.
The question I have is, you're saying that there's 18% of the students are still going to be remote learners. With that 18%, I mean, if you have 100% full classroom, how do you plan on keeping your distancing? I mean, do you have guidelines in place if the classroom is actually full, so to speak, and you don't feel you can maintain the distance? Are there any kind of fallback scenarios?
So right now, we strive for 3 to 6 feet. Like I described, we know that at Blackrock, for example, we could have 20 desks all facing the same direction with about 4 feet between them. So that's good news. We don't expect to have too many classrooms that are going to fall over that number. Here at the high school, there's a couple of classes that are heavy in population, but they are still all desks facing the same direction and they are 3 feet apart. They're close, they feel closer because they're not 6 feet apart, but we are still maintaining that social distancing. So the fallback would be, of course, if there was a massive influx of new students, we would have to figure out where they would go. But we know where we're going to put our distance learning students if they come back, and we would know where they would fit in the classroom. We'd be able to prepare. So any child who has a parent who says, okay, I'd like my child to come back to in-person learning, that's why we have 1 week, Sal. We have 1 week before they can return. The parent would give us that heads up, and then we would be able to prepare for their arrival and make that determination if we can maintain social distancing or not, and prepare for it before they arrive.
If for some reason that 1 or 2 people decide to come back from remote learning, if they basically cause an imbalance that would be putting us past the guidelines, do you have the right to refuse them to come back in, or no matter what, you have to accept them?
No matter what, we would have to accept the students and find a place for them. So for example, in grades K through 6, we would have a different teacher for the online learners than we would have for the in-person learners. So when they come back, they would be coming back to a different teacher, and we would be able to place them in a classroom where there is space to accommodate them. And then in grade 7 through 12, it would be the same, but according to their schedule and how they would fit in that space. So they cannot be refused, Frank. They are to be welcomed back, but we give them a 1 week's notice deadline so that we can prepare for their return.
Okay, thank you.
Did I say Frank? I meant Sal.
No.
I'm looking at Frank's head, Sal. Sorry, I'm looking at Frank's head.
Jen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had, so actually feeding off of that. One of the slides said that when they return, there would be about 50% of the kids in the class. Was that if we continue the same model, or is that's if we continue the same?
Yes,
and
if we stay hybrid.
Okay, and there's a lot of, and I'm not discounting the hard work you guys did, there's a lot of whenever feasibles in the slide presentation. That's very vague, and there's no other locations for classes. Like if the classes are too large, there's no other locations. So what happens when it's not feasible? We just put them all in one room?
So the state gave us that language. I want to make that clear. So in the state's big plan, they said whenever feasible or as feasible.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between the vagueness of the state's plan and what we're doing here is that we don't have COVID spread. We're doing something right. So the way that we're managing populating our classrooms is working. So yes, if we were to have an abundance of students come back, say for a very popular high school class, because we could spread them out differently in K6, then we would have to be looking at, John and Gianni would be looking at how can we accommodate these children? And we would say, this is a time when it is or isn't feasible to have that class be socially distanced 3 to 6 feet. But I have to say, we're not finding issues here. So what we've been doing is taking it very seriously with the whenever or as feasible as a last resort.
Okay.
Is that an accurate statement for the administration?
Yes.
Okay, so my next question is, has there been any parent feedback on what parents would prefer to see?
So parents have emailed me. I don't know if they've emailed the administration, but I'll start. This is Francine talking. So, you know, it depends on what the plan is.
Mhm.
There are parents who prefer the hybrid, and there are parents who prefer the all-in. There are parents who prefer synchronous and those who prefer asynchronous. That's why I think it's important in John's introductory statement. It was very important for him to say what he said, which is, we know there's going to be obstacles. This plan that you choose tonight is going to have the same circumstances or results as the plan we picked back in August. We can't have this plan be everything for everybody. It just can't be. But we have resources here that we will capitalize on, and each of the schools will be able to address those needs, because we know there are going to be some children who cannot conform to this plan for whatever the reasons are. And there are going to be some parents who don't like this plan for whatever their reasons are. We need to make sure we educate all of those children. And we need to reach out to them. So yes, the feedback that I've gotten has been on both sides. It's not necessarily skewed one way or the other. And I think it would be fair for me to say that it's been the majority of one thing or the other. I can have the administrators speak to what they've gotten for feedback.
I'll go first.
Okay.
I have student feedback, they're both informal.
You mind if I just interject for 1 second, John? I have about 10 to 15 upperclassmen in my house every other day, and I've asked them, and they all want to be in school. There is not one of them that has a complaint with the mask. There is not one of them that has a complaint going back to school. They want to be in school. They want to be in front of the teachers. They do not like the online, and that's 15 upperclassmen. I've asked them all. They all want to go back to school.
And I'll add to that. So in my meetings with students, and they're regular, I ask that question. So the overwhelming majority of students, maybe a couple did not, but they all want to return. That's the overwhelming majority. Of course, there's a couple here and there that maybe would prefer remote learning completely that are here. But very few, I've heard zero positive feedback about being in part-time and being at home part-time. In fact, I think it's been incredibly disruptive for those students. They don't have regular sleep habits. They don't have regular work habits. And the going back and forth has been a real struggle. And, it's going to have an impact on learning. It is having an impact on learning.
If you don't mind, this is Andrea Peters, the Director of Pupil Services, and I'd like to add to that. Looking at it strictly through the lens of somebody who addresses the needs of special education students and their families, I have heard nothing but families pleading to come back more often. And certainly our teachers are struggling to manage the needs of our students over 2 days of in-person learning in terms of being able to meet those IEP goals and objectives and the number of service hours that we need to provide. It's been incredibly challenging, and I have heard nothing but parents genuinely pleading to come back more often than we are. So I would echo everybody's statements here.
Thank you, Andrea.
This is Kristen Bernier, and at the intermediate level of 4, 5, 6, I would echo what John Perucci said in terms of speaking with the students. Overwhelmingly, they want to be there more than 2 days a week. You do have a couple of exceptions who would rather be elsewhere, but most of the students really would like to be there. I've had several phone calls and several emails from parents asking about synchronization and saying that that would be helpful for their student when they are learning remotely. And that's for both full-time remote learners and as well as the remote learners on those 3 days. Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
This is John Kozlik, principal of BlackRock. Just to, again, to echo, I've heard feedback on both ends. I've heard more feedback about parents and students wanting to be in school more. And there's certainly, a risk with students being in school more. And for the synchronous learning, one of the risks of synchronous learning is that there'll be some families who have difficulty doing that on the schedule. We believe that, first of all, we have an amazing outreach staff in our schools who are all very talented and they work really well with our families. So I certainly believe in my school at BlackRock, and I think I speak for the admin team, that we can manage that risk in a much better and safer way than the risks that Mr. Perucci described a few moments ago with students and their work habits and their sleep habits and not having a schedule and not being able to fully engage in the school process, which are the risks that we are taking by not having them in school more than they are right now. Thank you.
Thanks.
I'd just like to say something really quickly, just because I have more of a math background, and I know in talking to a lot of my teachers in and out of the classrooms that that's more so the frustration of many parents. As many of you know, math and algebra and even the higher mathematics are very difficult for parents to be well versed in. And I think that being full in person for these 4 days will certainly help with that. And it's an area in our achievement numbers that I would not like to see go down. So I'm very in tune with our math and science numbers and very concerned about them if we stay in the hybrid model. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. I had one question. I don't know for Francine or the administrators. What feedback have you gotten from your staff in regards to if we go back full in person? Do you anticipate a number of staff not wanting to come back, and will we be able to find some substitutes to staff them? Is that going to be an issue at all?
I have had one staff member, this is Francine, I've had one staff member approach me saying that they are concerned for their own health if we were to come back full in person. However, you can't just opt out. So there has to be a bona fide reason to change your work status. To answer the question, the second part of the question, which is, would we have a place for them to work? At this point in time, no. But we have worked very hard to make certain that those with bona fide issues would be able to be accommodated. And I think that's why we were able to have that K6 circumstance, which is a wonderful, wonderful solution, reducing a lot of extra concern, even to Sarah's question, to not have to worry about the in-person live in those little grades.
Thank you. Heather, did you have any questions?
My question is if they were to do the in-person more 4 days a week, are we going to continue using Google Classroom, or are we going to get a pencil?
I'm sorry, that's not clear.
My internet connection is not very good. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Google Classroom.
Are we going to continue to use that?
Okay, Heather, I think the question that you're saying is, will we continue to use Google Classroom, or will we have paper and pencil for in-person learning? Is that pretty much the question? Google Classroom doesn't go away in either of these models. We need to always be ready to go online. If we have to shut down because of a COVID issue, we need to be ready to hook up to Google Classroom and continue and go. Now, the question about paper and pencil is left up to the instructional strategies in the classroom, but I am certain that the teachers are eager to get them, get their fingernails dirty with some real media instruction, as they've been working on in this half and half model. They really want some consistency of the 4 days. So to say no to Google Classroom would not be wise. We would still need it for Wednesdays for all of our in-person learners. And we would definitely need it for our distance learners who have opted out of in-person instruction. But that would help us move seamlessly if we needed to go to a shutdown. It would allow us to continue educating students while we're closed.
I'm sorry, my internet's not working.
Go to a shutdown. It would allow us to continue educating.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, but my question was more along the lines of, so my kids, when they get their assignments for the day, it's the same as the distance learners are getting, so to speak. So my kids are sitting in the classroom getting the same exact assignment as those distance learners. So I'm just more or less asking if it's going to be more of an instruction, to the whole class, so to speak, than I don't know what I'm trying to say, but just as far as
I think Francine, I can speak into that. It's Jessica. Yes, that's definitely going to start happening. And actually, it's already been started for many of our teachers have started going back to the traditional model where they're using the student workbooks, they're using paper and pencil. So to answer your question, I know exactly what you mean. Yes, we are slowly moving towards that. And that's why we wanted this full in person, because it just became very difficult to do double the amount of work for teachers in the hybrid model. So that's why this is strongly our recommendation.
John Kozlak, Black Rock principal. So Heather, I think the way I'm reading it, what you're asking is the in-person teacher will no longer have two separate groups.
Right.
The in-person teacher, again, speaking for the elementary level, will have one group of students. Those students will be in person 4 days, but they would also be at home on Wednesdays. So they would have a Google Classroom component, but it's only one group. In the elementary schools, those students who are full remote or distance learners, the opt-out students, they're not working with the in-person teacher either. So they're working with a separate teacher, all in a virtual setting. But am I getting at what you're asking? So the teacher will not have two groups. The in-person teacher will have one group of students, and that's it.
Yeah, I can speak to the high school. Currently, teachers are planning for two different classrooms. They're planning for the kids at home and the kids sitting in front of them. Because of asynchronous learning, that they're forced into that. So they're planning double and triple the time. So we would revert to one classroom. So the kids at home and the kids in school would be sitting in the same classroom at the same time, doing the same activities. Now, obviously, there's some limiting factors there. If they're doing a science lab in school, clearly the student at home isn't going to have the same level of engagement as if their body was in the building, in the classroom. So I think to answer your question, the synchronous learning will allow for one classroom to occur at a time. And the teachers, it'll eliminate the need for teachers to plan additional lessons for those students at home. I think that answers your question.
Yes, I'm sorry, I had technical difficulties there. My issue, and I know that's a lot of other parents' issue, is kids sitting in front of a computer for 8 hours a day in school and not getting anything, to work on in front of them. Do you understand what I mean? Like that's just was my issue, my question.
We are concerned with the same thing. So because we are in a synchronous model does not mean that a student is going to be sitting in front of their computer for 7 hours. Okay, there's going to be the same break time. There's going to be times when the teacher gives direct instruction for a bit, and then the student goes and does their work. But they'll have access to that teacher throughout that entire period. And again, I'm speaking for the high school. The 7 through 12 will be able to provide the students at home with work to do, and the students at home will have direct access to the teacher during that period. But that doesn't mean that they have to sit in front of their computer for 7 hours.
So if you think about it, if you're an in-person student and you're a distance learner, the in-person student has passing time. The in-person student has lunch. I'm talking about the high school. So when passing time is occurring, that's a break. When lunch is occurring, that's a break. At the elementary level, John can speak to it even more, and I'm sure Kristen can as well. You have breaks. Recess is a break at the elementary level. They may not have passing time, but they have a break. So it is a duration that is synchronized to the school day, but we don't have the kids doing 100% of the time learning. You're not learning during passing time. You're not necessarily having a lesson at recess. So that will be downtime for the children throughout the day.
And the admin had the same concern. We don't want kids to be sitting in front of a computer for 7 hours, but then again, we haven't sat down to work out all of the details. We're waiting for approval. So we don't have a lot of these answers. All we know is that we are going to have to be flexible. We're going to have to understand that there's going to be obstacles that need to be dealt with and overcome. But no, we don't want students sitting for 7.5 hours in front of their computer.
And certainly,
in-person, this model makes it only a half day in front of your computer on Wednesday if you're an in-person child. If you're an opt-out child, you will be going through your courses 5 days. But if you're an in-person child, Wednesday is a half day of sitting in front of that computer, and all the other days of the week you're in person. So I want you to have that in your head. I'm emphasizing that with this model, it will reduce sitting in front of a computer for hours at a time for the in-person students.
And certainly, if I can interject, as Mr. Perucci said, you know, our intention isn't to have the students sit at a computer all day for 7 hours a day. And, you know, just as we figured out some of the glitches in our model currently, I think as we move through this, we will improve and will become more efficient and more effective in our instruction. You know, so you know, as we move through the month of October, I think it'll get better and better.
I agree. And I just would like to say that part of the task that that's set before us is many of the research-based strategies, instructional strategies, are all kind of out the window because they require grouping and they require kids, they require a lot of discourse. So we are now faced with the task as admin to look at the research-based instructional strategies and modify them so that our students are benefiting from these strategies. So that's something that we're going to be working on rigorously towards so that we can get back as close as possible to some of these strategies that are actually research-based and produce achievement. So that's our goal.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate everyone. I know a lot of parents had the same concerns. You know, I see the teachers posting assignments at 6 o'clock in the morning. I see the teachers recording assignments at 11 o'clock at night, and I appreciate them, and I want them to know that most of us on the board, if not all, appreciate everything that they've been doing, and the administrators too. My last question is, as far as opt-out learners, are they going to be learning on the same pace as in-person learners? Are they going to be getting the same assignments? Are they going to be getting the same stuff like that?
Yes, I think John described it well by saying there will be dimensions of their day where they will not have the same level of activity because you can't do a science lab at home that's being done by the in-person student, but they will be in pace with that science lab when it's happening. Similarly, I think Mr. Kozlak said very nicely that the students are going to be kept in pace with this distance learning teacher. They are a bona fide member of that grade level team. So they are keeping pace. They are keeping strong pace. In fact, we had a very successful team that Mr. Kozlak brought to my attention, and they've been asked by our curriculum director to share that success, how they were able to coordinate that team in first grade last year. That's who they are, the first grade team last year. They stayed in sync so that it was even bigger than the difference between an opt-in student and an opt-out student. It was the entire grade level. That's awesome that you're getting a similar experience regardless of teacher.
I can just add to that. My son was in first grade last year, and it was very awesome. But going off what Heather was saying in my earlier question, so K6 are going to stay asynchronous the whole entire, no, they're going, okay.
They're going to be, your in-person students will be synchronous on Wednesdays with their own teacher. But the
opt-out,
opt-outs will be synchronous with a remote teacher.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Oh, I had one more thing too. Just thinking about drop off at like Black Rock and Center School. I know that that's been a challenge. I can see your face. It's probably going to get even more challenging. So are we thinking about ways to make that better? Especially at the Center School, I know that it's been blocking the road and that kind of stuff.
One of the things that I did when I shared this plan with the board, with parents, with staff, is I also shared it with our chief of police. He needs to be brought into the circumstance of he has the heads up to know this might happen. And he was with me every step of the way when we were looking at the hybrid plan too. We expected low ridership on our buses. So he knows that we're looking at this, and one of my first phone calls tomorrow will be to the police chief to say, okay, this was the decision that was made.
Thank you. Jennifer might have a few more questions.
Yes, actually, just a couple more. So one of the things I'd like to know is what at each of the 3 schools, because they all run very differently, what do break times look like for the kids that are now going to be in school 4 days a week with masks on?
Principal, speak to that, John.
First, for Black Rock School, our students have, what I've instructed the teachers from the beginning, it would be the same now because the students would still be wearing masks in school. As much as once per hour, the teachers are encouraged. Sometimes they go a little less, depending on what their schedule is, and they have various other breaks, traveling from one place to the other. No more than once an hour, they go outside. If outside's not available because of weather, they'll go through the cafeteria. Teachers have planned it within their teams and across teams. So they go outside, they take a loop around the parking lot, they stay socially distant, they have a break. It's really a water break. It's an opportunity for them to go outside, doubles as a mass break, and that's where they have their snack. So we have those built into the schedule. And students go out their own wing, so to speak, of the school. So we have locations at the egress points of each wing where the different grade levels can do that. It avoids mixing a little bit too.
Christine?
At the center school, we have mass breaks at lunch and at recess time. And then I've also talked to the 3 different grade level team leaders about when appropriate natural breaks might be. So they may take a break, at the end of their last class before they go to special, or they might do it at the tail end of WIN or something that makes logical sense instructionally. And so they have put it into their schedule, formalized mass breaks at these particular times, but and it turns out to be, roughly a little more than once an hour throughout the school day. And then, there was a concern about what happens if it's raining. So we have purchased a tent, or we're renting a tent that will be put up sometime this week for student use. So that way, if they need to go outside, they're underneath a tent if the weather is poor.
All done, Chris? Okay, so I think I didn't hear your whole question, Ms. Nolan. Can you just repeat the question?
It was just to outline what the masks break look like at each one of the 3 schools.
Okay, so we had not formally at the high school given mass breaks. We initially told the teachers, feel free to hold classes outside, to take breaks as you see fit. Teachers, apparently, some took advantage of it. Many did not. Students have not been asking for the breaks, but the teachers in the survey requested that there's more of a formal plan for that. So I am meeting with team leaders tomorrow, and that's the #1 agenda on it is how will the mass breaks look? When will they be? And how often do we need them? So we're in the process of dealing with that.
If I may add, at the high school also, our students get breaks with regards to masks during lunch. So they can remove their mask during lunch while they're eating, and then when they've completed eating, they put their mask back on.
And what you'll see in this week's update will be what the nature center's next step is looking like, because like John said, we're trying to offer opportunities outdoors, and Mr. Craig has been dedicating his focus to that nature center and expanding the amphitheater area and other areas that never existed before in order to accommodate more outdoor classes. So you'll get a picture this week of some of the homemade benches, stools that he's making for that project.
And some classes, such as Mr. Bonnell's band class, he's already started bringing his classes outside to practice. It's we want to take advantage of the good weather for as long as possible, and that's on top of the other precautions that we've put in place for band and chorus.
And I've seen Mr. Scanziano's class every period. They start with a walk around the building, and then they proceed to class. And from time to time, I have seen guidance counselors with small groups of students. So they are taking advantage, like John described, where they feel fit. And I'm sure I'll see more and more outside my window as John works with the team leaders to formalize.
Okay, I'm sorry. I have just one more question. One more question. Just to clarify in my own head, the synchronous learning, a camera will be in the classroom with the teacher, the kids for 7 through 12. I understand the lower grades are a little different. The teacher will be in the classroom, teaching the kids in the classroom, and the kids at home will be watching the same thing.
Yes.
So do the kids that are sitting in the classroom that could potentially be recorded, is there any specific authorization for parents to have those kids in that classroom? Well, we could say no recording, it could be recorded.
We have a code of conduct that we're putting together where I have asked my colleagues in the districts around us that have already started synchronous learning to share with us their code of conduct for synchronous learning. And that would be for both those that are online and in person. So we will be able to fashion a code of conduct so that parents will be aware, students will be aware, acclimated to that code of conduct. And of course, if someone were to breach that code of conduct, there would be appropriate consequence.
Roxy Finer. My question is regarding the concern of the staff with cleanup. Is having Wednesday, a remote day, enough time for the janitorial staff to catch up on what they are indicating they're not keeping up with?
I have been assured that it is. I know that my administrators haven't asked for more, but if you want to speak to it, I know that they were very, they're scheduling their maintenance for Wednesdays. So unless it's an emergency, they are not touching any maintenance issues until Wednesdays. John, you had some information from Spencer I think you might want to share, or?
I'm not sure what you're referring to.
So just your concern about Wednesdays was that?
I'm not terribly concerned, and we won't know until we're in the swing of it fully what's needed, but this is part of the weighing of what we need. You know, I believe our first and foremost consideration needs to be, are the students learning? And then everything else is considered after that. And right now, there's building evidence to suggest that they're not learning to the degree that we would like to see them learn. There's huge gaps. So can we guarantee that custodial work will be all done? No. But I think that's one of those problems that we can deal with as we move. I hope I didn't overstep in saying that, but I think we have to focus on the first and foremost importance, and that's student learning at this point.
And to John's point, the Wednesdays are kept so that we don't have to neglect other parts of the building, because it's one thing to disinfect, it's another thing to clean. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. There's a big difference between disinfecting something and making sure that we have properly dust mopped a stairwell or managed an area that needs to be cleaned after a disinfection or after use. So the custodial staff, we support by first taking this step. And then the next step would be when we come back in November, we are under the assumption that by then we will have ample custodial staff trained and in place where we can offer to you Wednesdays for in-person learning. But and because we're waiting on fingerprints and all those wonderful things that we cannot control, we want to be ready with our Wednesdays for now.
Thank you. And I would just like to follow up, talking about instructional time at the high school level. It's Roxy Finer again. I really don't think the high schoolers need a lot of mass breaks. They're only in school before they have lunch for about 3.5, 4 hours. So at their ages, they are able to keep a mask on for 4 hours until their lunch break, and then keep it on again for another 3 hours afterwards. So I understand the staff wants something hard in writing, but let's stop taking away from instructional time and keep things a little bit more informal, please. Thank you.
Add to that. I agree with that. But I also want to make sure that the students who do need it are self-advocating, saying that they need it. And we would work with those students. But I have confidence that our team leaders will come up with a solution that minimizes out of class time. I agree with you. I don't want to see class time taken away. That's all already finite to provide mass breaks. But that's only because I haven't received many requests from students, and there's been virtually no indication that they're suffering or struggling. If that were the case, then I think the prudent thing to do at that point would be then to provide what they need. But I haven't really heard much. So I think I'm kind of in your court with that. But let me work with the team leaders. I'm confident that they'll come up with something that's adequate.
Is there one thing to add to the mass break? I mean, is there any way the mass break in high school could be like a bathroom break? If one student's not, you know what I mean? I'm just throwing that out there. Instead of the whole class having to take a break if they don't want to, and it's bothering one student, can it be like a bathroom?
Short answer to that is yes, Frank.
I'm gonna say it can't be a mask break indoors. That's why the team has to figure that out.
Right. So, but
You can't go taking your mask off because you're walking to the bathroom. You have to keep your mask on indoors.
No, but I haven't been inspecting any bathroom stalls, so I don't know what they're doing with a mask on or without a mask on in a bathroom stall, nor will I be inspecting that. You know, do some kids do that? Possibly. So I can't say no, no one does that. All I can tell you is that there has been no request from a student or the student body at this point for built-in mask breaks. So something is adequate at this point.
Are there any other question or comments from the board before I would like to just see if the student representatives have any input or comments or questions that they'd like to also ask? Caesar, McKenna, or Isabella, if any of you would like to say anything, just take yourselves off a mute, but you don't have to say anything if you don't want to.
This is Isabella. I just want to say that I agree with like what Mr. Perucci is saying and what everyone else is saying in regards to coming back in there with the second proposal. I think it's a good idea. And like as a student and from speaking with other students, I would say that we are kind of eager to come back in school and have that structure to like be more successful in the classroom. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
This is McKenna. I agree with what Bella's saying, where having the structure would be really nice to go back the 4 days. And along with like a lot of the AP and UConn classes is a lot harder to keep up with like online, and it's not the same kind of like type of structure of learning. So I think the 4 days is a lot easier or better effectual for us to learn.
Thank you, McKenna.
This is Caesar. I also agree with the second model, mainly due to how I've noticed that lots of students tend to kind of fall behind and lack into the classes during the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday periods. So I feel that by attending school more often, you may be able to prevent this from happening anymore.
Thank you, Caesar. Is there any more discussion from the board on the motion? Dave, Sal, do you have any questions or comments? Okay. We will vote by consent on this. So we will ask if there are any nays. Jen Nolan is a nay. Are there any other nays? Any abstentions? Okay, motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the location of future Board of Education meetings, and I am assuming, Francine, you may have some more information for us on this?
Yes, I do. If you would go to the next slide, please. So the governor put out recently that as of October 8th, we're going to be moving to phase 3. With that comes a capacity of 100 people meeting indoors. Right now, we have been at a capacity of 25 people. So we were concerned as a board as to where we would meet and how we would meet. We also had a no visitor policy under the current hybrid plan. If we were to contemplate having open public meetings to the capacity of 100 people, we would not be able to do 6 feet of distancing in this room, but we would be able to do somewhere between 3 and 4 feet of distancing. The capacity of this room at 6 feet would be 39 people sitting out there. When we've had a lot of people, it hasn't been more than that. So it would allow for us to maintain the typical audience in this building, but it would have to be coupled with a visitor flip, a change in how visitors can enter this building. We could continue to have them enter through the side door so that they are not requiring any type of disinfectant response from our custodians out in the main hallway. But we could follow as of Thursday, October 8th, what the governor is offering. Stacy, would you go to the next slide, please? So I am asking that the board take action regarding the location of future meetings of the Board of Ed by accepting the phase 3 capacity for indoor meetings at 100 and allowing those meetings to occur in this room and to allow visitors to participate or the public to enter this room from the side door to minimize the need for disinfection after the meeting. Stacey, would you mind going back to the previous slide just so the board can see it while they're contemplating this?
This is Roxy Finer. I make a motion that the Board of Education meetings resume in the high school auditorium with the public invited in up to a maximum of 100 people. Those members who choose to attend, including the public, will enter through the side door so that there is no need to disinfect the rest of the high school.
Matt, one more second.
So any discussion on the motion?
If this motion were to pass, I would work with the administrative team to devise a series of rules or a flyer, a one-pager to provide to all public members of this meeting or any other board type meeting so that they would know the rules of entering the building. In other words, they'd have to wear a mask, they'd have to socially distance, they'd have to enter through that door, and we would post those rules on our website as well.
Can you hand out paper? Okay,
We can, if, I'm sorry if I used the term.
I didn't.
We would make sure that it's a one pager that could be very easily accessed electronically, or that could be posted as a poster that no one would have to touch. Yes.
Thank you.
I was thinking more along the lines of our student of the month, where we would invite them to our board meeting. There would be a piece of paper in the mail that they would get. And then that would show them the rules, kind of like the directions we give them to even come to this building.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Forgot about COVID. So sorry.
I think you're on mute.
Okay, it's Jennifer Nolan again. Will there be any kind of sign up? I know we have not hit the 100-person cap at a Board of Ed meeting in my time here. However, this would be the time that there would be a concern. Will there be any kind of sign up, or will people have to RSVP for the meeting? Is there a way to do that, or is there any plan for, or you're not worried about the 100-person?
I'm not worried about 100-person. However, I would want to have some type of account, and we also do need to know who attended, because our board meetings need to reflect who was in the audience. So we typically gather the name of the person and their address. We would have to figure out a way for them to do that with low touch or no touch. So that could mean separate pieces of paper with a pen that they keep, or it could be an online option, or it could be someone sitting at the door taking their name. However it is, we'll cross that bridge and come up with a solution that, like I said, is low or no touch.
Would we
I have one thing to add to that. I know the Board of Ed, I've been here long enough that I don't have a big attendance. But as of it is right now, this is something to do at night for people. So we do have to keep in mind, maybe we should think about an RS. People don't want to get out of the house and go to Board of Ed, want to come and see it.
I want to emphasize, I don't think we should eliminate the virtual, although sitting here at this meeting, I think all of us want to eliminate virtual because of this reverb that people out there can't hear. I'm getting an echo.
But is there a way that our one of our students, they can broadcast it live on the YouTube channel for us?
We could do that. We could look into that, but I would have to work with Mr. Perucci and see what he has available, because I know we had difficulty because some of the students that help with sound are also our athletes. So I want to be careful with that, not to obligate to anything. So,
but
I'll talk to Mr. Perucci tomorrow.
I do think though we should keep it virtual as well and stream it live, because I think
it's more accessible.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we will come up with a better circumstance for these meetings so that we can all hear each other live in person, as well as the virtual world can hear us. Right now, just to explain to the public, because of the resources we have, take this off because I'm hearing myself twice. Because of the resources we have, the best way to guarantee that remote in board members can legally participate in this meeting is to host this meeting as a Zoom so that they can be heard and hear us. If we get the proper setup of the equipment that will allow us to behave more like a conference would behave, then we wouldn't necessarily have to have our devices in front of us logging into Zoom. We would have just them logging in and they would be able to hear us and we would hear them. So right now, this is the best scenario and we will look into what other options we might have once this decision is made.
Thank you.
I would think we get it to the public just in case they don't want to come to the meeting. That's just why we have to keep it virtual.
Right. Any other comments or questions, discussion on the motion? Are there any nays? Are there any nays? Are there any abstentions? Motion carries. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Roxy Finer, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Matt Van Ormer, second.
Any discussion on the motion? Are there any nays? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. 7:13 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy.